Joining us this morning, Josh Rogin, Washington Post columnist covering foreign policy and national security. He's also the author of Chaos Under Heaven, America, China, and the Battle for the 21st Century. Thanks for being here this morning, Josh. I appreciate it. Disappointing news that Evan will remain in jail, but probably not a surprise given what we know about Russia and past prisoners.
Well, that's right. This is just the beginning of a long series of court procedures that Evan will have to suffer through that are predetermined, but nevertheless, the Russians insist on putting on. What we've seen in recent cases is that the Russian government will negotiate for trades for U.S. hostages, but they like to do it after they've finished their procedures, most of which are sham procedures that are predetermined, but nevertheless, they feel that gives them more negotiating leverage when it comes to dealing with the U.S. government. So he'll be in there for a while, but at least the procedures are moving along and we're getting closer to the point where he might be able to be traded or released sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about the prisoner swap possibilities in a moment. But first, the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Lynn Tracy, we saw her tweet a moment ago, said that she is arguing for continued access to Evan to make sure that his well-being is being taken care of. How much power does the U.S. embassy have in a case like this with boots on the ground there to have face-to-face contact with him?
In my experience with U.S. hostages in lots of authoritarian regimes, the active attention and public pressure by the U.S. government and the U.S. ambassadorship is crucial. And the ambassador's attention and public pressure will definitely have some effect. How much we just don't know. I mean, what we're seeing in Russia is a new era of hostage taking. This is the first U.S. journalist taken as a hostage since the Cold War. And in other areas of cracking down on Russian dissent, we see an escalation. My Washington Post colleague, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's a Russian citizen, was sentenced yesterday to 25 years in prison for speaking out against the government. So it's hard to predict because as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned, all bets are off. But no, I do think the Biden administration is doing everything they can, both publicly and privately, to do the best they can to get Evan home as soon as possible.
And how about your Washington Post colleague? We have been following that case closely as well. What do you know about his well-being, his health? There were concerns that he was losing weight and that he was being poisoned.
Right. Well, Vladimir Kara-Murza defended and actually said he was proud of his work to criticize the Putin regime while he was being sentenced to 25 years in prison for speaking out against Putin's invasion in Ukraine. And this is an unprecedented sentence. There's no doubt that he will be subject to horrendous conditions, as is his colleague, Alexander Navalny, who is also allegedly being slowly poisoned in a Russian prison and slowly made sick. And this is something that, again, will require the intense attention and advocacy of the international community, which does make a difference. And, my friend, Vladimir Kara-Murza, is only at the beginning of quite a long ordeal, but it is the attention that you're giving him right now and that all of us give him in the media and the U.S. government that will make the difference between perhaps him surviving that ordeal or not.
And the calls for the release of another American in Russian custody being wrongfully detained, Paul Whelan, the ambassador, addressing that. He's been detained since 2018. How does his case impact that of Evans right now and others being wrongfully held?
Well, they're interconnected in the sense that the Russians have a list of Russian nationals that they want to trade Americans for. And some of those Russian nationals are held in the United States and some aren't. And some of those Russian nationals, the U.S. government has some influence over releasing and some they don't. And so this becomes a very complicated sort of three-dimensional negotiation that may involve other countries. And there's a prioritization that has to happen. And that prioritization is not an easy decision for any administration. So Paul Whelan, Evan, and several other Americans who are wrongfully imprisoned in Russia are all involved in this. And, you can be sure that the administration is trying to get the best trade possible, but they're dealing with an evil regime that cares not about human life, much less the rights of Paul Whelan or Evan, and that's a problem that they just can't fix with a snap of a finger, unfortunately.
And finally, Josh, I mean, we want these men to be returned home. Brittany Griner came home, Trevor Reed came home, which was good news, but it also opens the door to a pretty slippery slope dealing with Russia that puts more Americans and others at risk, right?
Well, that's right. Hostage deals often lead to more hostage taking. That's the sad truth of it, is that, when you're a member of the family or if it's your friend, You definitely want that deal to be made, but inevitably the result is that you incentivize more hostage taking. We've seen this over many, many years. It's a conundrum. But what I would say is that, the best thing that we can do is to warn Americans not to go to Russia and put themselves in that situation. The second best thing that we can do is to increase the penalties on those Russians who commit these hostage-taking activities. And we do that through sanctions and a lot of other diplomatic and economic pressures. So the more we fight this practice, the better it will be. But it's just true that the more deals we make, the more hostages end up getting taken.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.